webinar training. And this is the first of the 2 sessions for this training. And this is a joint training by the CTP and the CJK NACO project. And our trainer today is Jocelyn Zoom, and I think most of you know her very well. And she has spent a lot of time working on the training materials. And also our CTP chair, Deng Shi, has spent a lot of time and effort to coordinate this session so we can have this webinar. Before we start, the few things to bring to your attention, and one is in the session you may asking to do the quiz, and to answer the question you will have using the bar on the top. Under your name there's 4 icons. The one to the right is the icon for, and I can change it to ABC, excuse me, and you can pick A or B or C as your answer. When the instructor asks you to do the quiz, you will click the icon and pick the letter that you think is the right answer. And also the sound system, if you can hear me okay, then you'll be fine. And we also checked with the slides moving. I think it should be, everyone should be following the same slides. Well, I think that's all I need to say, and let's turn over to Jiping or Jocelyn, then we start the session.
Thanks to Shuying for the introduction. First, I would like to thank Shideng and Shuying Jiang for their numerous efforts to make our seminar today happen possible. I'm Jocelyn Zoom, and I'm from Cooperative Program Section at the Library of Congress. And today, as Shuying mentioned, this is the first part of the training session and on NACO CJK corporate names. So today we will be covering corporate name references. And in the next session, we will be covering the CJK corporate references, conference references. A few important reminders. First, as you have learned that we are going to present the corporate references into 2 sessions. So our next session is set for March the 8th at the same time. So watch for the announcement for the registration of the next session. And the other 2 couple of important reminders are all the rules and examples we will be dealing with today are under the principle of AACR2. This session does not touch on RDA, Resource Description Access, which is the future upcoming cataloging instruction. And the other important reminder you may want to keep in mind is that not all the examples discussed here are live examples from the database, although most of them are. So don't be surprised if you cannot find the exact record in the OCLC. All right, MARC authority format for corporate body. Well, first of all, what is a corporate body that's defined under the cataloging rule? A corporate body, as defined under AACR2, is an organization or group of persons that is identified by a particular name that acts as an entity. Some of the typical examples which we will be covering today are, for example, associations, institutions, governments, government agencies, local churches, and conferences. Of course, conferences will not be covered in this particular session. So, about creating authority record for a corporate body name using MARC format. As you see under the first bullet here, we have 110 first indicator 2, second indicator blank for corporate body entered directly. 110 first indicator 1, second indicator blank is for corporate body entered subordinately. So pay attention to the different first indicator here for corporate body entered subordinately. And then we have 111 first indicator 2, second indicator blank for bodies entered as a conference. And today, which is the main part that we will be dealing with today, is the area in the second bullet, which is bolded here. So we will be discussing situations for 410 first indicator 2, second indicator blank for references entered directly. And then we will be also having some rules that covering for 410 first indicator 1. I'm stressing the indicator, first indicator here. For references entered under jurisdiction. And then at the next session, of course, we will touch on 411 for conference references. Before we get into the corporate body reference rules, let's spend a few minutes on an overview of a corporate heading entry rules. As you know, before we consider references, we want to make sure the heading of 1XX is set up and chosen correctly. So basically, there are 3 principles that I would say you would want to consider when you start to consider establishing a corporate body name. First, we need to try to determine the name of the body. Is it a non-government body or is it a government body? And once that's through, then we want to determine the entry of the body. Is it a direct entry or subordinate entry? If it's a subordinate entry, is there any type of subordinate entry rule that falls under? So those are the things that you may want to consider when you have a subordinate entry situation. And finally, once you decide the entry form, which is usually we say the form of the heading, then we need to look at, is there any conditions or say additions or omissions, so-called qualifiers that needs to be considered after the entry form. So those are the kinds of basic principles that you want to keep in mind when you start to consider a corporate heading entry. Now, according to the rule, choose a commonly identified name from items issued by the body in its language. If that condition does not apply, you can choose a form from reference sources. So we are talking about a commonly identified name. And so normally, the rule calls for entering a corporate body directly under that commonly identified name. Okay, so we're talking about the direct entry rule for corporate heading. Now, if you have, we are under the second bullet here in this slide. If you have the varied forms in an item issued by the body, use the form found on the chief sources of information. Now, if you have variant forms on the chief sources of information, I wouldn't say this happens common, but if this happens, you have the different forms of the corporate name that you are considering on the chief sources of information. Choose the form in this prescribed order. First, name presented formally. If that doesn't apply, choose the predominant form of the name. All right. Now, what about if you have different forms in different publications? Then the decision is to choose the predominant name. Okay, so these are kind of the overview of the corporate heading entry rule. Now, once you decide a corporate body that needs to be entered subordinately, as you all know, the ACR to NALCRI spend a good amount of, or a big chunk of area to cover the subordinate entry rule. Now, I have to point out, this does not mean that most of the corporate bodies are entered or created subordinately. Not because that it's being covering so much. The underlying principle here is that because it is an exception, that's why the rule or the instruction is spending a great deal of effort there to try to explain what is a subordinate entry and what are the subordinate entry rules. So keep in mind the default decision of AACR2 is the direct entry. Okay, now back onto the slide here about subordinate entry rule. Once you decide a heading that needs to be entered subordinately, okay, assume that you have made a decision whether it's a government or non-government bodies. So under the two big categories for government bodies and non-government bodies, we have different types of subordinate entry rule that you can apply. For non-government bodies, we have 6 types of subordinate entry rule. And once you decide it's a subordinate entry, another rule that you also may need to consider is the direct and indirect subheading. A direct subheading, I just want to stress a little bit more because we will have examples later on in case you don't have the background here. Now, for direct subheading is for a body that's entered under the lowest element in that hierarchy, okay, and omitting the intervening element in the hierarchy, unless that name has been or is likely to be used by another body under the same name. Okay, so we are talking about a direct subheading, and indirect subheading is the vice versa. All right, about government body subordinate entry rules, there are 11 types that you can choose from, and we are not going to go into details since we are talking about corporate references in this session. And again, similarly to non-government bodies, there is also instructions on direct and indirect subheadings. Okay, now that we have had an overview of a corporate body entry rule, now let's look at the reference areas. First, when and where to add cross-references. Well, the basic rule is to give entry of the variant forms that you think that the user might likely be using to search for. So that's one area where you need to provide the variant form references. And another area where you need to consider cross-references are rule-generated references. Okay, the rule-generated references are called for by the rule because the rule tells you you have to do that. So we know we would not need a 670 justification for the rule-generated references. Well, the variant form references do need to have the justification whenever you add the references in that area or in that category. Now, the third category when we need to consider cross-reference is when you have different corporate body names where they have relationships. And again, of course, we would not consider a simple cross-references. It would be a COSO 5XX cross-references. So just to mention that here in this session, but we are going to cover in detail in the next session on the 5XX relationships between multiple names. Now, where can I find all the cross-reference rules? Looking at the second bullet here, they are covered under AACR 2 and LCRI Chapter 26, and the majority part of the cross-references for corporate bodies is under point 3. Okay, but you may want to check on the introduction area under Chapter 26, but the main part is under point 3. Now, don't forget, there is also an area that covers corporate body cross-references, which is under LCRI Chapter 24. Now, this sometimes gets missed because it's a chapter that's covered for corporate body entry rule. So people normally would not think reference rules are covered in that area. But pay attention and be sure to also include that area when you consider corporate body references. Constructing references generally trace a reference from variant forms of entry that apply to the name chosen for the heading. So nothing new to all of us. We refer from a name used by a body or found in references that is significantly different from that is used in the heading for that body. So this is when we trace a reference from variant forms. However, do not trace a reference that would normalize to the same form as the heading, or see reference on the same record, or to the same form as a heading on another record. So if you remember normalization process, especially for those of you who have attended our first reference webinar on personal names, we talked about normalization process. Basically, you can't have a same 1XX to a same form in another 4XX. So here let's look at our example. In the 110.2 here, as you see, the first character has a diacritic, okay, and the second form, or I say it's the 410 form here, is without a diacritic. According to the rule, we would not trace a reference that would normalize the same as the heading, because again, as I mentioned, after the normalization, the 110 here with the diacritic will be normalized to the same form as if without the diacritic. So if you were going to consider a 410 without the diacritic, you would end up a two same form between 110 and 410, and that's not allowed. So here again, the rule is do not trace reference that would normalize the same as the heading. Constructing references from an English form. Now, for variant forms of a name, as we all have learned, generally we trace only one reference, and we do not trace from a reference or from a let me say that again. Generally, we do not trace a reference from a variant form, which means that you would trace a reference from a recorded variant form. I'm not sure that I was very clear in speaking this, but let me say that again. Trace a reference from the variant form, but we don't trace the the reference from the variant form from the variant form. Okay, so bear that in mind with me, and let's look at this one here. However, if the name chosen for the heading is not in the English form, and the name occurs, or you have a source that's showing that's an English form, the rule says that we do need to trace references from that variant form that applies to the English form. And let's look at the example here to try to understand what this rule is about. We have 110 here of a Chinese corporate name in its pinyin form, and the heading is under the subordinate here, as you see. And under 410, we have an English form of this corporate body. Okay, so according to the rule, we would trace a reference from the above reference. Did you see what I mean here? So normally we do not trace a reference from a reference, but in this particular case, if you have an English form of the name, the rule calls for a reference from a reference. Okay, we had a little bit of jargon earlier, so now let's test ourselves to see how we actually apply in the real example here. So as the instruction that you have learned earlier, we have ABC choices. So let's take 1 minute to take this little quiz and show your answer, and then we will discuss the result. Let's start.
Once you're ready to, don't forget to check the ABC icon and select the letter.
Notice that we have 110 here, and we have several cross-references. So the choices are for you to pick the right cross-references. I see some of you has made up the mind. Okay, don't worry whether you get it right or wrong, and we will come to discuss this together. It's a bit tricky, I have to say, about this rule. And again, sometimes or often people actually overlooked at this rule, but it is an important part since you all are dealing with scripts, which is non-Latin or non-Roman languages. So chances are you do have to work with the English forms. And how do you consider the English forms in terms of cross-references? So this is an important rule. Okay, a lot of you have said, okay, very good. Okay, a lot of you have made up choices. Very good. Shall we look at our result? You can give a quick
Jocelyn,
all of you
I see some people, they didn't know how to using the multiple choice there. They type in, put into the chat room instead doing the selection there. So yeah, make sure people using the manager.
If the people, for all of them, see the top, there are 4 squares. The first one is a smiling face. The second one has a human figure with a clock. The third one is a hand. And the last one has a letter A on it. So click that button and you can choose ABC.
Great. This is very helpful. I'm glad to see you mentioned it.
We may delete the and then republish the result.
Okay.
I did. I did
Sure.
republished.
Okay.
Let me do it again then.
Okay. Well, perfect. All of you are seeing that we have a choice A for half of 42% of you chose choice A. And we don't have choice B, and we have very little for choice C. I actually say you all have been doing very well. The reason is the answer is choice A. All right. Now let's look at our answer here. Okay, very good. All right. Now with a green check mark, this is our first time, but in the rest of the sessions you will learn with the green check mark is the area where I marked as the correct answer for the exercise. Okay, let's take a look at this exercise again briefly and see why it's choice A. Okay, we have the 110.2 here. Okay, we would like to see what are the correct references. Okay, for number A, 410.2, it's the direct form for the English form. Okay, direct reference from the English form. And then B is a form that's entered subordinately in its original script, which is Korean. And then you have the third 410.1, which is entered under the English form. This is exactly where we just talked about. You can or you should have an English form of reference traced from the previous English form, which is the first 410 here. So the third 410 is the correct reference. Now look at the last 410 here. Why this one is wrong? Did you notice the first indicator 2? This is a wrong indicator because we are entering this reference subordinately. So the first indicator should have been 1. Okay, so the correct answer for this exercise is A. Alright, moving on, cross-references from an initialism and acronym. Okay. When a heading or a reference consists of initialism or acronym, we make a reference from that initialism, but we do follow capitalizations and punctuations. And look at our example here for Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy. Alright, we have an abbreviated form available and it's in capitalized letters. So according to the rule, the cross-reference is provided from this initialism keeping the same capitalization. Now, we make reference from the form without periods when the form includes a period. So this is another rule in terms of cross-references of an initialism. But okay, so here's the example. Let's look at the example here. I think that's better explain what the rule is about. We have a 110.2 here for the corporate name. And we have a 410.2 here with an initialism with the period. Okay, so this is how it's appeared on the piece. Now the rule calls for also giving a cross-reference, omitting the period or by removing the period. Okay, so that's the rule, but not vice versa. So in other words, if you have a cross-reference without a period, you would not provide another cross-reference with a period. Some more about cross-references on initialism and acronym. Okay, normally we include qualifiers in the reference if it's appropriate to the form in the reference, even if the qualifier has not been used in the heading. Here is an example. We have the 110, which is a Tokyo University, and we have this research institute. If you look at the last 410 here, it's a references that's provided under the subordinate body with a qualifier of its parent body. So the rule tells us include a qualifier in the reference only if it's necessary. And here continue on for the cross-references from initialism. Do not add a qualifier to a reference of an initialism unless breaking a conflict. So here we have an example. We have the last 410 for a cross-reference from an initialism. Okay, the rule said we do not or we should not add a qualifier for a reference from an initialism form, but in case if you need to break a conflict, say if you have a CMC as a heading form for a different corporate body name in a different authority record, that's when we need to break the conflict. That's when the qualifier is allowed under this initialism cross-reference. All right, time to exercise our skills. All right, we have 670 here, very lengthy 670, to provide you all the information about this corporate body. We have again 3 choices for you to pick. Which one is the correct choice according to the rule on initialism and acronym references? Begin. Remember, it's the last button right under your name, as Shuyu mentioned. Okay, if you could give us a quick response, that would be terrific. Okay, shall we take a look at it together? All right, I see we have the majority that picked choice number C. Perfect, excellent, excellent. All right, now let's look at our answer here and see what is the correct choice. All of you have gotten the correct answer. It is C. Okay, you all have got it. The reason why it's C is because A and B are incorrect. B has the qualifier that's not allowed, and A has included a period, which is also not allowed. Perfect. This is a great job. Well done. And let's continue on another topic. Cross-references of different forms of the same name. Because of the language area or non-Roman language area we are dealing with, very often we have a different romanization forms available. Okay, so this is an area where you want to consider cross-reference, which is to provide different romanization forms when you have it. Our first example, obviously you can see it's the different romanization of the personal name for this corporate body. The second example here, and as you see in the red circle of the first 410, we have the form under WNNE. Again, this is a former romanization form, but it was provided to preserve the history. And as you have learned, this is a previously valid AACR2 heading form. Okay. Sometimes you have a different language forms that you need to record in the cross-reference. But first, we want to get it straight about our heading form when you have a different language forms. If the name appears in different languages, use the form in the official language of the body. All right, then provide a reference from other language forms available. Now, if you have or if there is more than one official language and one of the languages is English, use the English form. Okay, so that's about official language rule chosen for choosing for heading forms. If the name of an international body appears in an English form, use the English form. So in other words, if you have an international body, use English as the official language form and provide all the other language forms that are available in the cross-reference. This is nothing new, so we will quickly get through this and move on to see another example here. This is I call it exception. The reason is this is an international body, but it's national in scope. So in this case, we use the official language of the local chapter for this heading, and then the English form becomes a reference. So pay attention here to this particular type of situation where the official language of the local chapter in this particular example is Chinese, even though the international body for this name, may have multiple official languages such as English, but because the scope, the activities are all happening within the national level. So in this case, we treat this official language for this local chapter, which is Chinese, and then provide the English form in the reference. Okay, let's look at, we have another quick quiz for a different language form. And again, exercise your judgment, and we will have 1 minute to take this quick quiz. Make your mind for choice A and B. Let's start. As you see, there are a couple of 670 fields here provided different language forms, and choice A and B have a different language forms chosen for each heading and cross-reference. Very good, very good. I see very active participation among the audience. Great. Few more seconds before we publish our results. Okay, let's go ahead and see our result. Very good. Okay, now let's see. We have a choice A. We have 27%. Okay, for those of you who are still pondering, and you may realize that you have had not enough time to consider your perfect choice, but do a quick thinking and give your choice so that we can see what is your initial thoughts, and that way we can better emphasize in different areas. So I would like to see more encouragement among the audience. Okay, all right, very good. Let's look at our answer here. Great. Okay, most of you who participated have gotten the correct answer. Yes, the key here, the official language for this body is Chinese. So the pinyin form is chosen for its 110 form. All right. All the other language forms become references. Very good. Moving on, we have another quick quiz. And here we have provided you with a record. Okay, so this is the record that you are seeing. Now tell me which choice is correct in terms of whether this heading has been correctly created or not. Let's start. Great, great. Couple more seconds. Okay, very good. Excellent, excellent. We have a 33%. All right, I want to see 50%. Okay, I want to see up to more than 50% of the participation. Okay, most of you who have seen this, who have made your choices, have made the correct choice. Yes, this is not entirely correctly created heading. The reason is in the authority status, which is the level of establishment. The cataloger coded A, which is a full level. Now, as you see, this is a Korean corporate name, and the official language should have been in Korean. And if the official language is not available, then the authority status here should have been set up as C, not A. Very good. Well done in the different language form reference areas. Now let's get into a special rule area for corporate body in Hong Kong. Okay, now first of all, as you know, the official languages of Hong Kong remain Chinese and English. So two official languages remain. Okay, but because there is uncertainty about English remaining as an official language, so the policy office back several years ago made a decision that, when I said, I apologize if I tend to be too brief. When I said a policy office, I meant the policy office here at the Library of Congress made a decision that all government bodies of Hong Kong are established provisionally. Okay, so regardless of the language forms that are available in hand, we establish all government bodies in Hong Kong under provisional level. So if the item being cataloged, say, is in Chinese, or shows the government body's name in Chinese, then establish the body in Chinese and code the name provisional. And if the item shows the government body's name in English, establish that body in English and again code provisional. Now keep in mind, this rule does not apply for non-government bodies. So in other words, we would code full level for all the non-government bodies, for all non-government bodies in Hong Kong. Take a look at a couple of examples here. The first example is for a government body in Hong Kong, and as you see, it should be provided at provisional. And from 110 and 14 here, you also see that both English and Chinese forms are available. But the rule says that, or the decision was to use the English form in the heading 110. All right, now come down to the non-government bodies. All non-government bodies in Hong Kong are established at the full level. Okay, so if you look at the 110 here and the rest of the 410, yes indeed, both language forms or both official language forms are available. And again, we choose the English form as the heading form under 110. All right, I believe we also have a couple of exercises for you to take a look and to do to see how you do in this area. Okay, the first exercise here we have is in the 670. And again, as you see under subject B, we have Media Asia Films Limited, and we have the scripts available, and it tells that yes, the cataloger has the information that this publication is from Hong Kong, or a source that tells that it's based in Hong Kong. So give you your choice. Let's start. I already see people are making choices ahead of me. Great, wonderful. Okay. All right, let's go ahead and publish the result. Okay, all right, let's see. 23%. Okay, the majority has picked A. That's correct. All right. Yes, that is the correct answer. So you did a good job finding the correct heading and references for this corporate body in Hong Kong. Okay, the English form, regardless whether it's a government or non-government bodies. All right. Now, if this has a fixed field available on the screen, you would choose between full level and provisional level. And because this is a non-government body, you would choose full level. All right. Okay. Now, let's look at our next exercise. This is a government body. Let's start this exercise. Begin. I see Mary Jane had a good question asking if there is a similar special rule that also applies to Macau Special Administrative Region. I am not aware of that. I think one of the reasons is because we don't have as many publications from Macau as from Hong Kong. But this certainly is worth of checking. Let me write down the question, and I will check back on this one. Okay. All right, the majority has picked A. Okay, very good. 47%. Excellent. You all are actively participating. Okay, now we have a choice A, and let's look. Yes, indeed, choice A is the correct answer. Why? Again, this is a government body. And again, regardless of the language, the English form is the heading form. Okay, so this is good. All right, very good. Any other questions up to this point? Yeah, Mary Jane, I'm not sure between Chinese and Portuguese about Macau, but I will check back.
Jocelyn, Mary Jane also asked another question on the slide 10. Maybe we can answer that question at the end, so we don't have to go back to jumping back to that slide 10.
Good point. All right. Yeah, good idea. Lucas had a question. BVI, why is that provided? Looks like as it stands for the place name corporate registration. That's possible. It could be like that. For the other types of references, I have to say that I did not verify whether the cataloger has done exactly the same thing. Let me go back here. Okay, Lucas is asking the question about the second 410. Yes, that's questionable. It may not be appropriate, and as I'm reading it now, it does not look like as an abbreviated form or initialism for this corporate heading. So Lucas is correct, and the original cataloger probably misunderstood this part. And I did not examine all the cross-references unrelated to our rule here. So yeah, so please ignore the second 410 here. Good question. Okay, let's move on to our next category. Cross-references are provided from jurisdiction. So in other words, if you have a body that's entered directly, the rule calls for making a reference through the government, or sometimes we say through the jurisdiction, or subordinately. They all mean the same thing. Okay. Let's look at the couple of examples showing on the screen. I see this is a museum. Okay, the museum is administered under the government, so it's a government body, and the cataloger decided that the heading should be entered directly. So according to the rule, we provide a cross-reference entered under government, under the city name. Okay, so that's the red circle under the first 410. Let's look at our second example here, the second 410 here. Again, the cross-reference is provided under the government. I believe it's province equivalent area. But anyway, this is a cross-reference entered under the government. Okay, so keep in mind, when you have a government body that is entered directly, make a reference through the government. Okay. Now let's talk about, for a moment, inverted forms or inverted references. First, I want to point out, for inverted references, it applies for both corporate names and conference names. Because we are not going to talk about conferences, so we are only going to discuss the inverted references under the corporate names. And the next session we will cover inverted forms for conferences. So let's take a look at what are the situations or when we should consider inverted cross-references. Now first condition is, the condition is only when you have a government body entered under jurisdiction, okay? Only when you have the government body entered under jurisdiction or entered subordinately. As I said, these mean the same thing. In that case, we have two situations where inverted cross-references are considered. First, make an inverted reference from the generic term in the name that indicates the type of agency. When that term is preceded by a word that doesn't mean or is not recognized as a part of the name. Okay, so a little bit again jargon here, but checking on the examples will help us understand a lot better here. Okay, we have a 410, and we have the first 410 here, State Bureau of Seismology. Okay, according to the rule on inverted cross-reference, we provide a cross-reference under the generic term that indicates the type of agency. Here is bureau. Okay, when we have the first word or the word before that type of agency word which is not being recognized as a part of the name, which is the state, in this case provide an inverted cross-reference. Okay, so an inverted reference is provided under the generic term that indicates the type of agency, Bureau of Seismology. The second situation where we need to consider inverted reference is when we have a form that starts the first word, or I shouldn't say starts with the first word. We make an inverted reference from the first word in the name and from the keyword of an English form of the name if that name is entered in a non-English language form. Okay, again, let's look at our example. Pay attention to the second red circle here, which is the third 410 you are seeing. Okay, the first keyword or the keyword of an English form of the name. Okay, now we see it. It's the word seismology. Okay, so if you want to say the keyword can usually mean the subject word, that's okay. But again, this is the keyword of an English from an English form, and this is when we make an inverted reference. Okay, so we have taken care of two or both inverted reference. The first one from the generic term that indicates the type of agency. The second one from the keyword of an English form of the name. All right. Okay, let's test ourselves and see how well we understand on the inverted form references. Take 1 minute pause. Let's start. A bit of a tricky here because I also sometimes I had to just take a pause and to see where is the reference needs to be made. Where are the words that I need to take out or put behind for an inverted form reference? All right. Okay, I see several responses. Okay, a few more seconds. Make up your mind and give us your choice. Okay, let's go ahead and publish. Okay, for those of you who are still thinking, you can follow as I am talking through, so you can verify about your thinking whether you are in the right direction or not. Okay, very good. We have a number C, okay, choice C for the majority part. And let's see if the majority has taken the correct response. Yes, the majority has given correct response. Okay, let's take a look at A and B. Why A and B are the correct references. The first one, 410 under China, Bureau. Okay, this is the magic word bureau, indicating type of agency. All right, when that term is followed by a word which is a state that does not being recognized as a part of the name. Okay, so we are through with the first inverted cross-reference. Now let's look at why the second one is also correct. Cultural relics. Are they subject words? Are they the key words for this corporate body? Yes, I say yes. So the cataloger decided to give a cross-reference from the keyword of an English form. Perfect. Excellent. Okay, now let's move on to cross-references of local churches. Okay, I have to say, so far we have been talking about when to provide cross-references. This actually is an area where I want to tell you that please do not make references. Okay, here's the rule. When you are creating a corporate heading for local churches, as you see in these two examples on the screen, the rule says do not make a reference from the jurisdiction for the local churches. You are not seeing on this one, right? That's correct. So these two headings were set up correctly. But you may be seeing such references when you do maintenance work, or when you are checking the files, or when you are setting up your own local church names. And those references are incorrect, and I say it's obsolete, because one time they were allowed or they were instructed, but we are not providing cross-references from jurisdiction for local churches anymore. So if you are working on a heading that has such references, remove them and correct them. Alright, and let's check our exercise here and give me your choices. And let's start. Okay, we have several 410 here. We are asking you to look at basically the first 410, the second 410, the third 410. Okay, all right. Is everybody seeing? I think this screenshot should be big enough for you to see. Okay, more responses. Okay, what's wrong in this SNAR? Okay. What went wrong in this SNAR? What did we just talked about? And how do you apply that rule here? Okay. Okay, more responses. Yes, let's publish the response, please. Okay, the majority has chosen choice A. Okay, and let's see if you all got that correct. Yes, you all got that correctly. Okay, it is the second 410 that is wrong. Why? Okay, if you look at the second 410, it's a cross-reference entered under jurisdiction. Okay, that has become obsolete, so do not make them. More cross-reference rules. Okay, when you have a body that's entered directly, the rule says you can make a cross-reference entered indirectly. So in other words, if you have a body entered directly, you can make a reference under the parent body, especially when the parent body appears in the qualifier, as you see in the screenshot under 110 here. In the parentheses, you see the National Center for State Courts, that's the parent body. And if the parent body is used as a qualifier for a corporate entry form entered directly, then it is advisable, not a must. You can, or it is a good idea to provide a cross-reference in its indirect form or entered subordinately. Okay. All right. Now, let me see if this is a good point. Okay, yes, I want to say that, all right, in the parentheses, you have the parent body qualifier. Now, if you check the rule says that for the parent body served as a qualifier in the heading form does not have to be an established form. So in other words, you do not need to set up a heading for the parent body when it's used as a qualifier. But when you start to provide a 410 cross-reference entered under the parent body, now you know you have to make sure that subfield A, the parent body, needs to be established. Okay, does that make sense to you? All right. Cross-references from indirect subheading. From the very beginning, if you remember when we talk about corporate heading entry rule, under the subordinate entry, we mentioned about direct and indirect subheading. Now we said, okay, you can enter a body entered under direct subheading rule, which means you enter a body in the lowest element in the hierarchy. Let's look at our first example, the Beijing University example here. Okay, we have the research office and we have the department. Okay, as you see, the body is entered directly under the lowest element under the research office. Okay, so that's direct entry rule. Now our cross-reference for indirect subheading calls for if you have a body that's entered under direct subheading rule or direct subheading entry, refer from the name of its immediately superior body, meaning provide a cross-reference from the next level hierarchy, okay, for this direct subheading entry. Okay, so check our example under 410. Now we know that's a direct subheading entry. Now if you look at the first 410 here, the cataloger had interposed the department in between the university and the research office. So this is called for by the rule. Provide a cross-reference from the indirect subheading when the heading is entered under direct subheading. And the second example, okay, you notice that we have 1-1 here. Okay, now the first example is showing that is for a non-government body. This rule equally applies for names entered as a jurisdiction, which is a government body name. So if you look at the first 410 here, similarly to the above example, a cross-reference is provided under indirect or under its immediately superior body. Okay. All right. Now let's check ourselves on understanding this rule with the next quick quiz. Okay. Let's have 1 more minute. Let's start. What we have here is we have given you cross-references, but we want you to look at the hierarchical structure of this corporate body and tells us if you think the cross-reference has been made correctly or not. I see some quick responses already. Okay, we can go ahead and publish our result. Okay, now the majority has actually, the majority has number A for true. All right, okay. As you are still thinking through, let's see. Okay, yes, the correct answer is A. So the cataloger did provide a correct cross-reference for the indirect subheading. Okay, so you can take a look at this slide a little later on, but just to be brief here, as you see, we have 1 Japan and the province, not a province, but I say ministry, and we have the division, and we have the branch, and we have the office. So we have about 5, not including the country, we have about 4 actually, 4 or 5 hierarchies here. And the cross-reference was it made from its immediately superior body? If you look at the 410 here, yes, indeed, right. So we do not make a cross-reference from the entire hierarchy. Okay, that's the tricky part. It's the cross-reference that's to the next immediate hierarchy that needs to be interposed in the cross-reference. And that's what we need. All right. Okay, moving on to some more cross-reference rules. cross-reference is direct entry. We have talked a lot about indirect entry, indirect subheading cross-references. Now in the next few slides, we are going to focus on some of the direct entry cross-references. Okay, again, back to subordinate entry rule for non-government and government bodies. The rule says here, okay, if you are with me on this slide, reading this, reading on this slide, for non-government bodies type 2, 3, 4, and 5, and for government bodies type 2, a direct cross-reference, direct entry cross-reference is required if the name appears without a parent body on the chief source. Okay. So that says that if you have a name that belongs to one of those types, and if the name of the parent body is not with the name or the subordinate body that you are setting up, the rule calls for a direct cross-reference or a cross-reference entered directly. And usually we qualify with a parent body. Okay, whether it's a jurisdiction for government or organization for non-government, we generally qualify with a parent body. Now let's look at some examples and to to see how these rules actually apply here. Okay, let's say we have a 24.13 non-government body type 2 subordinate entry. Okay, now one criteria has met. The other criteria that needs to be met in order to provide a direct entry cross-reference is that the parent body is not part of the name. So let's look at the 670 field here on the first screenshot. Okay. Yes, indeed. The parent body, the name of the parent body is not appearing together with the name of the subordinate body. So in this case, both criteria have met, and we are providing a cross-reference in its direct entry form, qualified by the parent body. Okay, and I have circled in red here, which is the second 410. Okay, moving on to another example under this rule. If you have a type 3 example, so now we have decided, or the cataloger knows that this is a type 3 subordinate entry rule. What about the second criteria for parent body, that's whether appearing together with the subordinate body or not? Okay, check 670 field here. Indeed, the parent body is not together with the subordinate body. So both criteria met, and the cross-reference, which is the first 410 here, is provided from its direct entry form. Similarly, for type 4, when you look at the 670 field here, okay, and if you see some of you that are reading the Japanese scripts or romanization forms, you can easily tell, okay, it is a comma that's being separated here. That shows that this subordinate body did not come together in its string or in its running form with the parent body name. So yes, the criteria also has met, and the cross-reference of a direct entry form is provided. Okay, now I know this can be a lot for you to absorb all within an hour, but as long as you know there are such rules and you know where to check on these rules, that would be, I think, then you have done your job. So let's look at our first exercise on this rule, direct entry. We have 3 choices for you, and we have the 670 field here showing you how the body has appeared, and we have the 110, Okay, as you all are, okay, I think I'm going to, save. Mike Choppy, you have a good question there, and I'm going to answer that once everybody has through with the exercise. Okay, let's publish the result. Okay, most of you, the majority has chosen B. Okay, and let's see whether you all have gotten the correct answer. Perfect. Okay, so why is B? Alright, according to the direct entry rule, we have a research institute, and as you see, the 110 is entered subordinately. And I may say this would be a type 5 subordinate entry rule. And if you check the 670, yes indeed, it met the other criteria, which is the parent body did not appear together with the subordinate body name. So so all criteria have met, and we will give a 410 and the choice B in its direct entry form qualified by the parent body. Now, some of you also, I see some questions, good questions. Let me answer one by one. Now, first, Mike asked a question. He was wondering why some of your parent body qualifiers are not in its catalog entry form, and sometimes they're not even the direct transliteration form. Remember that I mentioned earlier that if the parent body is used as a qualifier for the cross-references or for the heading form, the key point here is if the parent body is used as a qualifier, the rule does not call for a catalog entry form. So it can be a form that's found from the publication. Okay, so that's Mike's question. And another question asks why it's not A and B. Okay, now A, as you see here, is a direct straight running form. Okay, now I wouldn't say this is wrong, but this would not be a typical case that we would usually give. The reason is, if you are searching the database, once you start to search Tokyo University or Daikaku, the form, the result for this research institute is very likely has already been jumped out in your search result. So in other words, it does not serve a great deal of purpose. Okay, does that make sense to you? It's not wrong, but it's not a typical references that we are giving. On the other hand, why B, choice B reference is important, which is a direct entry form qualified parent body, because as you see, if you start to search Tokyo Daigaku, you would not be able to find this subordinate entry heading. Does that make sense to you? So a cross-reference for a direct entry form and this subordinate body is needed. And number C, yes, it's I think this is a good reference. It's okay if the cataloger's judgment calls or tells that we do not need a parent body qualifier. Okay, then this cross-reference is okay as well. So in other words, A and C are not completely wrong, but it would not be the perfect or best references that we would provide according to the rules. Any more references? Yes, Mr. Morimoto just asked for another direct entry, and it's right in our next slide. Okay. Mr. Morimoto, it would be in the next several slides. I was just a little bit ahead of time. So let's look at our example in this slide. And let's see which choice is the correct choice. Again, similarly from the other one, you would choose the best possible answer. Remember, when we talk about direct entry form, we talk about the subordinate entry for non-government type 2 to 5, and we have a type 2 for government body. Okay, so as you see, the committee here really stands for type 2 government body entered subordinately. So this is a type 2 heading. Now the next criteria, then you need to check the 670. Okay, and see if the second criteria has met. All right, shall we take a look at the answers? Okay, the majority has picked B. Okay. Wow, the majority has picked B, but why the correct choice is C? Okay, now let's look at one by one of each reference. Choice A, the first 410.2 here. Okay, now is this a form that you found from the source? No, it's not. So this would not be the correct reference form. Okay. Now, why some people or most people chose B? Okay, yes, the form, the entry form is all good. What about the qualifiers? Okay, the qualifiers here, according to the rule, this is a special decision made by the policy office. When you use a qualifier for Career South, which is the catalog entry form, you do not need to keep the word South in parentheses. So in other words, the correct qualifier for bodies in Korea, use Korea only. So that's why C is good, not B. All right. Now comes to the rule that Mr. Morimoto just mentioned. When you have a type 6 non-government bodies entered subordinately, the rule says routinely make a reference from the entire name of the body unless that name also fits type 1 of the non-government bodies entered subordinately. Okay, so let's see what we have in this example. All right, okay. If you look at the scripts here, okay, that gives you a clue that, okay, this library, okay, and if you look at the 670 here, yes, it is a form that's appeared in its entirety. So the name has appeared in its entirety. So it does belong to type 6. And it said, and the rule now here tells us make a reference unless it also fits type 1. What is type 1 for non-government body entry rule? It's those divisions, branches, those names that have a keyword that meaning or indicates administrative subordination, and it does not apply to our library here. So in other words, this only belongs to type 6 for non-government bodies entered subordinately, not type 1. So as a result, the first 410 is provided. Okay. All right. Very good. Okay, so by this time we have covered most of the cross-reference rules on corporate names. One more thing, which is not a rule but you want to keep in mind, and that is when you have a change in the geographic qualifiers for a corporate name, you need to start to make a new heading form under the current geographic qualifiers. And then you would give the former form with the earlier geographic qualifiers under the WNNE form. Okay, so for those of you who have taken the personal name segments, you probably remember we talked about WNNE at that time. So here we do have a choice. If a body is qualified by a geographic name, we use the heading for the current geographic name as the qualifier. And if that geographic name qualifier becomes obsolete or has changed its name, then the new 110 for corporate name needs to be re-entered or needs to be used to reflect the current geographic name. And then the former name, which has the early geographic name qualifier, would be under the WNNE. So this is just a special situation where you want to pay attention to. Sometimes corporate body also moves to another location. This is another situation where you want to consider using a WNNE coding situation. Okay. All right, I think up to here we have covered everything, but before we finish the session, I want to say that remember, when you start to consider adding the references, make sure first you do the search. Okay, after you check all the rules, but then you realize that actually there is a conflict. So make sure search before adding a reference to avoid a conflict. And always provide references according to the instructions. Remember, examples sometimes can be misleading, so do not solely rely on examples when you set up headings or providing references. And that's all we are covering today. And thanks to everybody. Let me now go back to slide number 10 and to answer what Mary Jane's question. Okay, we have that. Okay, Mary Jane, what is your question? If you could help me summarize.
I think she replies you already answered her question. Yeah.
Okay.
And
all right.
Yeah, there's one question. Lucas asked for slide. I think it's slide 25 or 24 about BVI. Why BVI is included as a crosser?
We have, thank you. We have answered that one, Lucas, and I'm sure you have understood it. The BVI is actually not related to the name we are considering, so ignore that reference.
Okay, I don't think.
But Erica has raised her hand for a while, so maybe we should ask what she has question or comments.
And we have about 3 minutes left.
You all have been doing very well. I am very excited. All the answers that you all came up, if you have seen or paid attention to the results of the results of the answers that you have given, every time the majority has responded correctly. So that is very impressive.
So should we grant Eric to speak, or did she have any questions?
Let's also say this. We have covered a whole lot. If you think the entire reference areas for all the corporate bodies, which is the most challenging area, I'm sure you all have questions. You may not be able to come up with your questions or phrase your questions or send in questions at the moment. Please do go back and send in your questions on the registration site that she has shared with you, and we will follow them up at our next session, or using some other ways to send you the notes or whatever. We will follow up on them.
Well, I think our time is almost up. Our next session will be announced by Deng Shi, right? Or already announced?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I will announce later, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And then in between now and then, if you have a question, you're welcome to send us emails. And if we can collect the questions, and we can discuss in our next section. And thank you everyone for coming, and thank you for your interest in NACO. And thank our trainer and thank our organizer, both Jocelyn and Deng Shi.
Thank you, Shu, for moderating.
Have a good day.
Yeah. Thank you for all participating. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.